At 65, I discovered a bedtime trick and my potency came back. My urologist couldn't believe it. I am 65 years old. And last Tuesday night, I was with my wife in a way I hadn't been in almost 4 years. Not in a desperate, relieved kind of way. In the calm, unhurried way of a man who knows his body again. The kind of night that ends with both of you lying there in the dark without saying anything, because there's nothing that needs to be said. My urologist sat across from me at my last appointment and looked at my numbers twice. Then he looked at me, then back at the numbers. He said, and I'm quoting him exactly, "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." He didn't ask what it was. I don't think he wanted to know. I'm going to tell you about the bedtime habit that changed everything. Not just for what happens at night, though that matters, and I won't pretend otherwise, but for what it did to my mornings, my energy, and the way I started feeling like myself again after years of slowly fading out. If you've been waking up and already dreading the day before it starts, stay with me until the end, because what changed everything for me isn't what you'd expect, and it doesn't come from a prescription pad. I know the exact feeling I'm describing, the mornings that feel gray before they've even begun, the sense that something important quietly left without saying goodbye. I went through that, longer than I ever admitted to anyone. What changes everything comes later in this video. Stay until I get there. The first time I noticed something was wrong, I was getting ready for bed. Not a dramatic moment, not a crisis, just a quiet, ordinary evening. My wife and I had been married for over 20 years by then. We had our rhythms, our routines. And that night, lying in bed with the lamp still on, she reached for my hand. That's all, just reached for my hand. And I felt nothing move in me, no spark, no pull, just a kind of hollow stillness where something warm used to live. I told myself I was tired. I'd been working long hours. I was getting older. These things happen. But I started paying attention after that. And what I noticed, once I started honestly looking, was that the problem wasn't one night. It was a pattern. My body had been changing for a long time, and I had been looking the other way, calling it stress, calling it age, calling it the natural order of things. The mornings were the clearest sign. I'd been waking up for the better part of 2 years without the physical response a man expects in the morning, the kind that used to be so reliable I didn't even think about it. Now it was gone, sometimes almost entirely, and I noticed I'd started sleeping worse as the months went on, waking at 2, 3 in the morning, lying in the dark with my thoughts going in directions I didn't want them to go. I felt like I was disappearing, and I couldn't explain it to anyone. Not to my wife, who deserved better than silence. Not to my son, who would have tried to fix it with some kind of advice. Not even to myself, really. I just kept getting up in the morning and going through the day like the person I used to be, while knowing somewhere underneath that I wasn't. I went to see my doctor. I'd been going to the same doctor for 15 years. He was a careful man, methodical. He ran blood panels. He measured things. And then he sat back and said that my levels were in the normal range. Not great, he said, but normal for my age. He said I should sleep more, reduce my stress, maybe try cutting back on coffee. He said age brings changes, and that learning to accept those changes was part of getting older gracefully. I drove home and sat in the driveway for a while before going inside. Normal for my age. That was his answer. That the man I was at 45, someone with energy, with desire, with a body that felt like his own, that man was gone, and gone was the right word for it because it was normal for my age. I wasn't angry. I was something worse than angry. I was invisible. I had walked into a room, described what I was losing, and been handed a permission slip to keep losing it. I tried one of the medications he eventually offered, reluctantly, on my 3rd visit, after I pushed. The side effects hit me harder than I expected. Headaches, a stiffness behind my eyes, and even when it partially worked, it felt mechanical, like borrowing something that wasn't mine, like pretending. I stopped after 6 weeks. My wife didn't ask me to explain. I think she understood more than I gave her credit for. That's when the silence really settled in. Not hostile, just enormous. Two people in a house, sharing meals, watching the same programs at night, and both of them carrying something they didn't know how to put into words. The thing that broke it open wasn't what I expected. I'd known the man for over 20 years. We'd worked together before I retired. He ran deliveries for the same firm I managed logistics for. I ran into him at a hardware store on a Saturday morning, and we ended up standing in the parking lot for almost an hour, talking the way men do when the time pressure isn't real. He looked different, present in a way I associated with men in their 40s, a kind of alertness behind the eyes, a solidity in how he stood. He was 73. Eventually I asked him, in the indirect way men ask things, how he was really doing. He laughed, and then, with the ease of someone who had long stopped caring what people thought, he told me. He'd had the same years I'd had. The fading energy, the waking at 3 in the morning, the slow withdrawal from what used to matter in a marriage. He didn't dress it up. And then he said he'd found something about 2 years back, a combination of natural things, nothing prescribed, and that it had changed his sleep first, then gradually everything else. My first internal reaction was genuine, bone-deep skepticism. I had spent years being told by actual medical professionals what was possible. I had tried what medicine offered. I did not believe, and I told him so directly, that something in a bottle was going to do what years of medical appointments had failed to do. I'd seen the ads. I knew what that industry looked like. Men being sold hope at the moment they were most desperate. I wanted no part of it. He didn't argue. He said he'd felt exactly the same way. And then he said something I've thought about many times since. I wasn't trying to fix anything dramatic. I just stopped sleeping through the night, and I figured I'd try one thing. What happened after that surprised me. That landed differently than a promise would have. He wasn't telling me it would change my life. He was telling me he hadn't expected much, and then something happened. He sent me a link later that day. I looked at it that evening and closed my phone and put it face down on the table. I left it there for almost 2 weeks. What made me go back wasn't hope. It was a night where I woke at 2:30 and couldn't sleep and lay there for 2 hours feeling the weight of everything. My wife's breathing next to me, steady and trusting. The years ahead, the man I used to be. I got up, went to the kitchen, picked up my phone, and read everything he'd sent. What caught my attention was the focus on sleep, not on desire or physical response as the starting point, but on what happens in the body while a man sleeps. The idea that the hours between 10 at night and 3 in the morning are when the body does something specific, something hormonal and restorative, and that if those hours are broken, the cost isn't just tiredness in the morning. The formula he'd found included something called milk thistle. I'd heard the name but never paid it attention, and he explained it the way he understood it, not as a liver supplement in the abstract, but as something that helps the body clear out what it doesn't need. Specifically, excess of a hormone that builds up in men past 50 and quietly works against everything else. The body produces it naturally, but past a certain age, if the liver isn't clearing it efficiently, it accumulates. And the liver does most of that clearing work at night, while everything else is quiet. Sleep quality and liver function are connected in ways I hadn't considered. There was also an antioxidant in the formula, described as something that works specifically on the blood vessels, the small ones, the ones that matter for circulation in ways I understood immediately. He said what he noticed wasn't dramatic. After a few weeks, the mornings started feeling different. Those were his exact words. I ordered what he sent me the link to that same night. I put the bottle in my nightstand and started the following morning. I want to be honest about what happened. I didn't notice anything in the first week, or the second. I almost stopped. Then somewhere around the 3rd or 4th week, I had 3 nights in a row where I slept past 5 without waking. Just that. 3 nights of real sleep. The kind where you wake up and something inside the room feels different. I lay there on the 4th morning and realized something had shifted, not dramatically, unmistakably real. The rest came gradually. I'm not going to dramatize it, but it came. The link is in the description if you want to look at it. It'll be there, no rush. But that was only one part of what changed. Let me tell you what I also started doing differently, because the nights and the habits and what I found are all part of the same thing, and none of them works quite as well alone. The first thing I changed was when I ate my last meal. I'd been eating dinner late for years, 8, sometimes 9 at night. A habit from decades of work schedules that I'd never corrected after retiring. It felt like comfort. The day done, the house quiet, a warm plate in front of me. I had no idea what that was doing to me while I slept. Someone mentioned, in passing, that the body's ability to repair itself at night depends on what else it's managing at the same time. Digestion, the blood sugar, the processing, the heat it generates, occupies systems that should be doing other work in those hours. Hormonal work, cellular maintenance. I thought of it like a factory with one crew assigned to 2 different night shifts. If the dinner shift runs long, the repair shift starts late. And the repair shift is the one that actually matters. I moved my last meal to 6:30. Plain food, a piece of fish, some vegetables, nothing heavy. Within 2 weeks, I was sleeping deeper. Within a month, I was waking up feeling like the sleep had done something. Researchers at a sleep medicine institute found that men who ate within 4 hours of bedtime showed measurably shallower sleep cycles than those who stopped eating 3 or more hours before. The mechanism: the body needs its core temperature to drop slightly for deep sleep to begin, and digestion actively raises it. The common mistake is mistaking post-meal drowsiness for good sleep preparation. That drowsiness is real. The sleep it produces is not deep. 6:30. Done. Not negotiable now. The second thing I changed was something I almost laughed at when I first heard about it. 15 minutes of walking after dinner. Not a workout. Just shoes on, out the door, around the neighborhood slowly, for about a quarter of an hour. I started because I'd read that walking after a meal helps muscles absorb what the body would otherwise leave circulating in the blood through the night. I expected nothing. I did it mostly to feel like I was making an effort. What I didn't expect was what it did to my sleep. After a few weeks, I was falling asleep faster. The usual restlessness, the hour of lying there waiting for sleep to find me, started shrinking. 20 minutes, then 10, then sometimes I was gone before I'd registered it was happening. Researchers at a university sports medicine program found that even light walking after an evening meal reduced nighttime cortisol, the stress hormone that, when it stays elevated into the night, keeps the body in a state of low alert and works directly against deep sleep. Cortisol is the enemy of the hormonal repair work that happens in those first sleep cycles. The mistake men make, thinking that evening movement doesn't count if they didn't exercise during the day. It counts. It happens at exactly the right time, when the body needs a signal that the day is ending and it's safe to begin. 15 minutes, after dinner, most nights. Before I go further, if what I'm sharing is reaching you the way I hope it is, hit the like button and subscribe. Not for me. For the man who's 2 or 3 years behind you in this and still thinks he has no options. That's who this channel is for. The third thing I changed was something I didn't expect to matter as much as it did. Light. Not diet or exercise. Literal light. The light in the rooms I was in during the last 2 hours of each day. Bright overhead lights all evening. The television. Screens. My body was receiving signals from all of that telling it the day wasn't over, that it should stay alert, that the systems that normally begin winding down at nightfall should keep waiting. The body doesn't use a clock. It uses light. Specifically, it responds to the quality and intensity of light in the environment to decide when to begin producing the hormone that governs sleep onset. When that signal is delayed, when it doesn't arrive until you're already in bed with the lights off, the deep sleep cycles that should happen in the first hours of the night are compressed. They start late. The hormonal work that occurs during those early cycles, including what matters for energy and desire, and how a man wakes up, gets cut short. I started dimming everything after 8, lamps instead of overheads. A warmer screen setting in the evening. Nothing complicated. Within a week, I was falling asleep earlier than I had in years, not because I was more tired, but because my body was finally getting the signal it had been missing. Researchers at a chronobiology institute found that men who reduced evening light exposure by even 40% entered their deepest sleep phases an average of 40 minutes earlier. The most common mistake, assuming that because you feel fine in bright evening light, it isn't affecting you. It is. The effect is silent, and by the time you're in bed, the damage to the night's architecture is already done. Dimmer light after 8, every night now. The fourth thing was what I chose not to put in my body in the hours before sleep. Not alcohol. I'd never been much of a drinker. Not caffeine, which I'd cut to mornings years ago. The thing I had to address was more specific. A habit of having a small sweet thing with my last cup of tea. A biscuit, a piece of chocolate. It felt harmless because it was small. That small sweet thing was causing a blood sugar rise right at the moment my body was trying to prepare for deep sleep. A blood sugar rise at 10 or 11 at night, even a modest one, triggers a hormonal response that keeps certain systems slightly activated through the night. It interrupts the early night sleep cycles that, in men past 50, carry a disproportionate share of the hormonal restoration work. Work that cannot be fully recovered later in the night if it's interrupted early. I cut the evening sweets. Replaced the habit with a small handful of unsalted nuts, sometimes a piece of fruit if it was early enough. The change in how I felt in the mornings took a few weeks to become obvious, but once it did, it was consistent. Less of the groggy two-step of waking and waiting for my body to remember who it was. A study tracking men between 55 and 70 found that those with the most stable nighttime blood sugar showed measurably better scores on physical vitality and hormonal markers than those with irregular evening eating patterns, even when other variables were controlled. The platform the body runs its night work on matters. Spikes are interference. Steadiness is what the repair work needs. No sweets after 8. That one cost me more than the others. But it held. I am 65 years old. I live in a house that has a garden, which I maintain myself. I walk in the mornings. I eat earlier than I used to. I sleep in a room that's darker and quieter than the room I slept in 5 years ago. And I wake up, not every morning, not with the reliability of a man of 35, but often enough and genuinely enough that the word alive has come back to mean something. I didn't come back to this version of myself through a dramatic intervention. There was no single morning where everything changed at once. There was a quiet accumulation of small decisions, each one chosen because it made sense, rather than because someone told me I had to. And somewhere in the middle of all those small decisions was the thing I found through the man from the hardware store, sitting in my nightstand, taken each morning with a glass of water. The central thing I want to leave you with is this. What happens at night is not separate from what happens in the rest of your life as a man. The body uses those hours to do work that it cannot do any other time. And most men past 50 are giving their bodies a broken environment to work in. Too much light, too much food, too late, too little stillness, and then wondering why they feel like they're falling behind something they can't name. Tell me in the comments, what was the moment when you first noticed something had changed? Not medically, just personally. The morning, the night, the ordinary situation where you looked at yourself and knew something was different. I read everything you write. I want to know. Now, the last thing I want to say before you go. The body responds differently depending on when you decide to act, not as a threat, as something I learned the hard way over about 4 years of waiting for things to correct themselves on their own. There are systems in the body, particularly the ones involved in what I've been describing today, that respond best when addressed before too much time has passed. Not with urgency, but with honesty. The window doesn't slam shut. It narrows. Gradually, steadily, with each year that passes without a decision being made. I nearly waited past the point where the change felt real. I don't say that to frighten you. I say it because it's true, and because I think you deserve to hear something true. More time without acting has a cost that doesn't announce itself. It shows up in smaller ways. More mornings where the distance between you and the person lying next to you feels wider than it should. More nights where the silence is comfortable only because you've both stopped expecting something different. More of the quiet feeling of being a reduced version of yourself, functional, present, but smaller than you know you could be. What I shared in this video and what's waiting for you in the description belong together. Neither one replaces the other. The habits and the nights and the decision to take something seriously. They work as a system. That's how it worked for me. And that's the only version of this I can honestly give you. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. Go there. Read through it. Make your own call. There's no pressure here. There's only information and a decision that's yours to make. The men who turned this around, the ones I've heard from, the ones like the man who first told me about it, they all had one thing in common. Not their age, not their situation, not their history with medicine. They decided to take one small step towards something different while they still had the energy to mean it.